Okay, so if you have a Bible, you can turn to Revelation chapter 7. We're basically going to stop, focus just on that chapter. We're going to try to do the whole thing. If the first half is really, if we're spending a lot of time on it, then maybe we'll split it into 2 weeks. I don't want to rush this one, so we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Let me open up the PowerPoint here so we can all read together. But again, if you have your own Bibles, feel free to use your own. And let me open up everyone's faces here. There we go. All right, Revelation chapter 7. Today we're not talking about the seven seals. Today we're talking about those that will be sealed or are being sealed. All right, so again, this is one of those very hot topics. Who are the 144,000, which we'll be reading about today? So let's see what the Bible has for us. Does someone want to read the first three verses? The first three verses of Revelation 7?
After these things, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads.
Okay, so let me give you a little bit of background before we actually get into the verses. So we are literally in between the sixth and the seventh seal. All right, so we've read the first six, and then there's almost like this commercial break, which is really more of like God kind of zooming into this time period. So this time period kind of between the sixth and the seventh, he zooms in because something important is happening. The exact same thing is going to happen with the seven trumpets. We're going to read six trumpets, and then he's going to use a whole chapter to zoom in with this kind of special message, and then we get the seventh trumpet, all right? So if you remember the sixth seal, it was nature itself. We're talking about earthquakes, the darkened sun, the blood moon, the stars falling from the sky, islands being moved out of place, the sky receding like a scroll. So it's very much like the world is announcing that God is coming soon. All right. When that happens, God kind of puts it on pause and zooms in here with this specific message. All right. The first thing that we see are four angels holding back the four corners, standing at the four corners of the earth and holding the four winds of the earth, so that these winds can't uh, affect the earth, the sea, and the
The
trees.
trees.
Any ideas of what that can possibly mean? Any ideas out there? Anything that you've read or that you understand?
Well, there is the idea that the trees, the seas, and the earth may represent nations,
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
Because if you go back to the book of Daniel, it talks about these beasts. And one text it says they're coming out of the land, and another one says they're coming out of the sea.
Mhm.
And so the land and sea seem to represent nations. And trees, the Bible makes a reference to trees as people. So, just put it very brief.
Yeah, you definitely see that with Daniel, right? So we know in Revelation, it's actually going to tell us that the many waters or seas usually represent peoples, right? Where there's a lot of people. The deserts usually represent places where there aren't as many people. For instance, the woman runs away to the desert, right? To this place where there isn't a heavy population, where the nations aren't. Um, so it would make sense that, yeah, he's holding back these winds. Winds are usually a symbol of strife, of calamities, of like destruction, things, kind of like the end happening. So it's like God is saying he's holding back the second coming. He's holding back that the big kind of time of destruction, that great, it actually has a name. It's in this chapter. A
Great
great
and awful day.
something like that. Let me see here. Do 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 do. Those are the ones that come out of the great tribulation, right?
Okay.
So it's like this great tribulation that's about to hit the earth, but God is like, well, hold that back just for a little bit until I accomplish a specific task, right? And so these calamities aren't falling upon the big nations and the more deserted areas. Yeah, trees usually represent people. And in fact, many times trees actually represents God's people, right? For instance, in the Psalms, plant me by the river, and the you get that strength and things like that. So many times, trees represent God's people because they're like alive and so on. And so it really looks like it's the whole world here, right? God is keeping the calamities away from the entire world. And why is he holding back the winds? Why does he need this special time, according to these verses here?
Well, it says until he seal the servants of God on their foreheads.
Yeah.
That's right. So this is what we call like the sealing, right? In the book of Revelation, there's a seal and there's a mark. They're really both seals to a certain degree, right? So you either have the seal of God or you receive the mark of the beast. Everybody in the Bible, it doesn't matter that there's thousands of different religions, thousands of different countries, nationalities, anything like. At the end of the day, everyone is going to be put into two groups. You either have the mark of the beast, which either goes on your forehead, on your hand, or you have the seal of God, which always has to go on your forehead. All right, it always has to go on your forehead. We'll explain what that means in the following verses. But is there anything else here that you want to bring out in these three verses? This is kind of just the foundation. This is the the introduction, I guess, to this chapter. But is there anything else that you want to bring
Is
up?
it talking about modern Israel or
We haven't got there yet. We haven't even mentioned Israel
sorry.
yet.
Okay, sorry.
I don't want to jump the gun yet because it's
Yeah,
gonna get
and
a little bit
I was
confusing.
thinking, I guess we're not there yet. I was gonna ask about their foreheads. Why the foreheads?
Well, when you read the rest of Revelation, the mark of the beast can go either on your forehead or on your hand. And usually what we mean by that, or what we assume that means, is if it's on your forehead, it's connected to your thoughts, right? It's connected to your belief system. So if it's on your forehead, you believe in this seal, right? So if you have the seal of God, you believe in God, you follow God. With the mark of the beast, the devil doesn't care whether you believe in it or not, right? So some people are going to truly believe in that apostasy message, right? They're truly going to believe in what they're doing. But there's going to be another group that knows it's not right, knows that what they're doing is wrong, but they're afraid. They don't want to lose their homes, their families, money, and things like that. And so they follow along with the beast. So it's not on their forehead, but it's on their hand because they're doing the actions, right? So they're acting it out. Therefore, it's on their hand. With God, you can't fake God. So you can't put the seal of God on your hand. It's either on your forehead or you don't have it.
Can it be in your heart?
Well, the head and the heart is actually interchangeable
Okay.
with the Bible. Yeah.
But this thing about the seal on your forehead has been mentioned in the Old Testament as well.
Ezekiel talks about
Ezekiel, 9 mentions it. Yeah. So
was
that also referring to end time, or was that referring to the persecution of the Middle Ages, or what?
I would say that's the judgment of Israel, because when you read it, it says that, it begins in the sanctuary, right? Begins in the sanctuary, goes to Israel, and then spreads out. I think ultimately it's talking about the end, right? Because uh, the sealing is what determines whether you're saved or not, right? So again,
Yeah.
we either have the seal of God or we have the mark of the beast. We either with God or with the world. So I would say that in the long run, it is talking about the end times. Though in Ezekiel's case, it seems fairly focused on Israel, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's probably that judgment time that we see, like in the book of Daniel, for instance, where it says, "I'm giving so much time for the people of Israel before, I go to the rest of the world."
Yeah.
Um, any other thoughts? Any other ideas on that?
Yeah, I think that when you compare Ezekiel, particularly from the ending of chapter 2,
Hmm.
way down to chapter 9, it is as though he's repeating the book of Revelation, even though not in the same sequence like
Yeah.
seals and trumpets and so on, and churches, but everything is there.
Hmm.
I mean, all the catastrophe of fire and death and famine is there. As a matter of fact, there are sections where he told Ezekiel to cut off part of his beard and hair and take a third and put it there and a third, throw it in the fire and put a third in the land and beat it with the sword, indicating the way disaster is coming, fire, sword, famine, and different things. So, and then the use of the word a third. So we'll come up with that later on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there seems to be a closeness between Ezekiel from the ending of chapter 2 all the way down to chapter 9. I think Judy mentioned chapter 9,
Yeah.
where there's a
9:4. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's such a similarity between, but you got to read between the lines
Yeah.
to be able to compare.
Yeah.
The second thing, I think Yvonne asked a question about if this pertains to Israel. And I think from the reading of the first few verses, it says from the four winds, or from the four, usually the four
Corners of the earth.
directions of the earth. So it is, as the pastor suggests, it's wide and broad. So it doesn't just take in Israel, but apparently it looks wider than just Israel.
Worldwide.
Yes.
All right, well, let's bring in the idea of Israel since we're talking about it. So let's read the next couple of verses here. All right, so once we get to verse 5, it's a lot of repetitions. It's just a lot of names. So someone that really likes names can read this one. 4 to 8. Anyone want to go through the 12 tribes?
And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 140,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. Of the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Gad, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Asher, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Levi, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Ishkar, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed.
All right, there's a good 12 names for the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is where Yvonne's question really comes up from, right? So we know we're in between the 6th and 7th seal. God kind of pauses everything and says, listen, I need to finish sealing the people, right? Putting the seal of God on the people. And we get a number. We get this number of 144,000, right? This number is going to appear another 2 or 3 times in the book of Revelation, in one form or another. And then he basically says that these 144,000 are divided perfectly among 12 tribes, all right, or among 12 groups, each group having 12,000, not 12,001, not 11,999. It's exactly 12,000 of each group, right? And then we get 12 tribes of Israel. But if you know your 12 tribes of Israel, you'll know that the 12 tribes change
Dan,
depending on what book or
Dan is
chapter you're
there.
reading in the Old Testament. All
Ephraim.
right? Because if you know your history, Israel had 12 sons, but then Joseph had two sons of for himself, and actually gave his two sons to his father. And so within the Old Testament, sometimes they interchange one of Joseph's sons with one of the 12 original. From the 12 original, there's one missing. Anybody know which one it is? Which of the original 12 tribes or 12 sons isn't on this list?
Benjamin.
Judah.
Judah's
Dan.
first one. Benjamin's last one.
Oh, it's the first one.
Dan.
Dan, I believe, is correct. Yeah. So if you go to Genesis chapter 49, it probably explains why. Genesis 49 is the prophecies that the father gives to his 12 children. All right. Dan gets a very strange prophecy. Does someone want to read it? It's Genesis 49, verse 17. It's right there on the screen.
Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heel, so that its rider shall fall backward.
All right. So Dan is very much represents kind of like Judas, right?
Mhm.
So out of the 12, there's always that one bad one, right? Who basically represents the devil. That's really what this is saying here, right? He's calling Dan a serpent. That goes right back to Genesis. In fact, it's very similar, the wording, to the original prophecy, right? He will step on the heel, right? He'll bite the heel, but then he'll have his head crushed. So that's probably why Dan is left out. In the same way that if God was to use like the 12 disciples, he would have left out Judas because he's the betrayer, right?
Betrayer.
So that's why we believe that Dan is left out of it. And I'm not even sure which one is added in. I think it's Manasseh. I think it's Manasseh that's one of Joseph's sons, but I'm not sure. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But Dan is one of the 12 tribes that's missing from Revelation's version of the 12. All right. Let me jump back. What do you think? What is going on here? This goes back to Yvonne's question now. Is it only going to be pure blood, Jews getting the seal of God? What do you think?
No, I don't think so.
Why not? Why not?
I think they mentioned only
Because
the
it said
Jews.
that those who went through great tribulations. And it's not just the Jews.
You're always ahead of us, Yvonne. We haven't read that yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, but you're
Okay,
absolutely right. You're absolutely
I better
right.
stop talking then.
Yeah, so right from these verses, when we talk about the 144,000, most people fall into two large categories. Those that believe this is literal, so
Gentiles.
there's literally going to be 144,000 people that are sealed, and they're all going to be Jews, 12,000 from each tribe, and they're going to have, I guess, a special job at the end of time. All right. So that's one way of looking at this. The other way is to look at this symbolically, right? So 144,000 is 12 times 12,000. So we know 12 represents the number of God's people, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples, 12 apostles, and it goes on. And so the idea of the 1,000 just represents, a large group. So it'd be 12 times 12 times 1,000, or 12 times 12,000. And then when it talks about the 12 tribes of Israel, if you go through this chapter here, actually Genesis 49, each tribe is given kind of a characteristic. So this is kind of all of us will fall into one of these 12 tribes, right? In terms
Right.
of our personalities, right? All of us have one of these 12 as our personality. And so if you take this symbolically, then what it means is God is going to accept, or he's going to seal his people, which come from all over the world, from all different types of personalities. It isn't just going to be like, people that are like Levites that are going to be saved, or people that are like Judah that are going to be saved. God is going to seal all of his people before the end of the world, right? Because again, that sealing is very important. It's part of the proof of kind of salvation, right? These are the ones that have been set apart as my children, right? So those are the kind of the two extremes, the general, all right? Though there's people that see it literally, there's those that see it symbolically. Now, within these two groups, it breaks up even more, but those are the two general groups. Yes, Yvonne.
Our personalities, won't it change?
Nope. If you read Ellen White, she says the one thing that we take with us is our character, right?
Well,
Kind of.
when you think of, yeah, I say character, but when people think of personality, you can have a un-Christ-like personality,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, I think when we talk about personalities, it's more generalized than that. So it's
Okay.
not necessarily like good people or bad people. It's more, there are those that are more reserved. There are those that are more upfront. There are those that are more, aggressive, not in an evil way, but just more aggressive. Like I would say Paul was aggressive, right?
Okay.
Paul, he never sat back to anything. If he believed in something, he would march forward. So Paul changed dramatically, right? From being the Jew to becoming a Christian. But his actual character, like who he was, didn't change very much, right? He was still very, gung ho, very aggressive. When he believed in something, he put his whole heart into it. Now, you could see how that could be used negatively, for instance, when he was killing the Christians, but he used those same passions when he became a Christian to then also preach the gospel. And so I think when we talk about personalities or character, it's more of those generalities, right? So not necessarily good or bad, but simply this is kind of what I'm like, I'm more reserved. I'm not much of a talker, while someone
Don't
else
we
might
all
like
be,
being at the front and so on. Yeah, go
don't we
ahead,
all
Louise.
descend from those tribes?
Are we all
We-
descended from those tribes? No, we're not all descended from those tribes. In fact, most of these tribes don't exist anymore. They've been completely
No, but I meant in the Bible, it says like we descend from Adam and Eve, and those tribes were
okay.
sent out.
Yeah, so
There's-
when you look at the Bible, we all came from Adam and Eve, but there's actually a reset, right? With Noah. So we actually all come from Noah and his three sons. From there, the nations begin, and out of one of those sons, we end up getting Israel, which ends up having the 12 tribes. So if we're from the other two sons, then there actually isn't any sort of connection outside of like, Noah or Adam and Eve. So one of the reasons why we a lot of times, like for instance, I believe more in the symbolic aspect of this, because you can't find, someone that's pure tribe of Manasseh. They don't exist, right? Now there might be someone that has some blood, right? Some generation behind from Manasseh, but not pure blood. That doesn't exist anymore. Even something like the Levites, which were very, very strict. They tried very hard to keep their bloodline pure. Only Levites within this group. Even they are very hard to find in terms of 100% pure blooded Levite or Judah or whatever. Which is why. Go
I
ahead.
have a
Go
friend
ahead.
that I have a friend that I work with. Her husband, he professes to be a Levite. They're Jewish, so I'm not sure.
And he
whether
absolutely
he's-
could be,
Yeah.
though if he's, if he doesn't have any other tribe in him, I would
Yeah.
be very surprised. And the
Yeah.
problem with this is, the way that this is written is this is talking about pure-blooded tribes, right? Like they're
Yeah,
not
right.
mixing Levite and Judah, Manasseh, and the other ones. So
Yeah.
the fact that he's saying 12,000 from each particular tribe, I don't know how God would do that. I don't know how God would find them, frankly.
I think it's like you said before, it's the characteristics of the person, not talking about blood or anything like that, because all the nations have been watered down.
Yeah.
So there's so much mixture, intermarriage and stuff like that. So I don't think this has anything to do with a pure, true blood a Jew.
No, I thought it was symbolic.
I don't think of it as symbolic either. I think it's literal. The number, I think of it as literal. That's me.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's real Jews.
Okay.
What I have learned is that there's going to be these 12 gates, and these names will be on the gates, and the characteristics or the trait that you overcame, that's the gate you're going to go through.
Yeah, so that you're talking about the New Jerusalem there, right?
So
The New
can
Jerusalem.
Yes.
Can
12
I
gates with
ask
the
a
12 tribes.
question here then? Is it
Yeah.
only 144 people that will be saved?
No.
144,000.
It's
Well,
a
so this-
special.
Yeah. So
Go ahead,
this is
Pastor.
where, when I said there's two basic groups, but then within the groups, you there's a lot of other kind of subgroups. That's exactly what we're seeing now. So, the ones that believe that this is literal, they pretty much fall into one camp, because if you think it's literal, then it all has to be literal, right? So the tribes are literal, the number is literal, and everything else. For those that believe it's symbolic, then it gets a little bit more murky, because for those that believe it's symbolic, they still might believe that the number isn't symbolic, like Yvonne, right? She's saying, I believe that it's 144,000. For those that believe in the literal number, then, and I think, Yvonne, you were saying it, these are going to be a special group of people that God chooses to do a specific something, like maybe preaching or getting the work out. Other people believe that the number is also symbolic. It simply means, 12 times 12, which is everyone that belongs to Christ is going to receive this seal. And this is what I was saying right at the beginning. It's hard to say if someone's right or wrong, right? Because it only gives us so much information. So we can speculate, we can guess, we can, debate back and forth, which is why I think it's important to at least give you the different options, right? So these are kind of the different ideas. You can read it for yourself and then see what you believe, right? What you think is accurate. Is there any other ideas of what this can mean? Any other things that you've heard?
I was thinking whether the reference to Israel and not Jacob, whether this has some significance in that the 12 tribes were descendants of Israel, who the name, of course, was given to change from Jacob to Israel, meaning an overcomer,
right,
or a prince with God. And these are a symbol of those who have overcome. And the second thing is, as we read a little further on, there is no more mention of this particular group.
Yeah.
So this group is mentioned here. And notice it says when the group is mentioned, John didn't see them. He heard the number. But when he looked, he saw a great multitude. So, which is really interesting. But as we read further on, that will come out.
And you know what? Let's do that. Let's keep reading a little bit more here. Verses 9 to 12. Does someone want to read this for us? It's getting dark. I'm gonna turn on some lights here. Go ahead. Anyone that wants to read?
After these things, I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. All the angels stood around the throne, and the elders and the four living creatures, and fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom.
And one more line there.
Oh, sorry. I can't pick that up at the bottom.
Oh, okay. Thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. So we couldn't go through a chapter without another song, right? And again, you're going to see this in Revelation. Singing, worship is very important in the book of Revelation. It's always coming up, this worship of God throughout the chapters. All right, so this is exactly what Ken was saying. So if we go back a little bit, it says, I heard the number of those who were sealed. Because if you remember, what John sees is the four angels holding back the four winds, right?
Mhm.
And then God says, listen, I need to seal my people. And he hears the number. He never sees the group. All right. He never actually sees 144,000 anything. He hears God speaking. He hears the number of who they're going to be and the tribes that they're going to be from. But then what he actually sees is this great multitude. All right. So it's really important to make that distinction here. He sees a great multitude, and this we're certain of, right? Because this is everybody. Nation, tribes, people, tongues, all standing before the Lamb. And then it's really important because it says that they have white robes, palm branches in their hands, all right? With the 144,000, it never says what they're wearing. It never says what they're holding. It only says that they're sealed by God, right? These 144,000. It's this great group without number, this great multitude that John specifically sees with white robes, all right? And they're singing to God. Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. So again, this group I think is fairly easy to see as this is everyone that's going to be saved. All right? Which is why they're singing about salvation. So everyone that's going to be saved isn't just Jews. It's people from all over the world, every color, tongue, nationality, it doesn't make a difference. Anyone that accepts God will be part of this great multitude. All right? Anything that you want to talk about in terms of these verses here? Anything else that you want to highlight?
So you notice also in mentioning these different groups, this special group of 144 isn't mentioned because it's just a larger group, the creatures, the elders, God on his throne, and so on, and the angels. But this special group is not noted here. Only one large group.
Has anybody ever heard that this 144,000 will have white robes with red border?
If you read Ellen White, she talks about the white robes with the white border.
With the red border.
The red line along their bottom.
Right.
Those are the people that are martyred. So the Bible, or Ellen White makes it perfectly clear. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember reading this. Those are the people that were martyred in the name of God, right? So they get this symbol on their robe so that people will know, this person gave up their lives for God. Let me check the chat here. Yes,
Richard is confirming what you said.
Richard is my
backup guy.
My checker. So it's not connected to the 144,000.
Okay.
It's connected to martyrs. That red.
I stand corrected.
When we do talk about the 144,000 again, however, it says that these are the ones that follow the Lamb wherever he goes. All right.
Exactly. This is why I believe it's literal.
Okay. Okay.
That's my reason for believing that.
So,
And you're
so
totally allowed to believe in that, right? That's the thing.
yeah, we have some more reading and we'll throw some more light, I think. So,
Yeah.
because when Ellen White talks about this group as a special group, she mentions that they will serve the Lord in the temple.
Yeah.
And so there was an incident, I don't know if it was early writings or one of the other books I've read.
Richard just said it. It's early writings. Richard just wrote it.
Where she said,
Yeah.
so there were some kids there and she told them they couldn't go in. They were told they couldn't go into the temple. It's only for the 144. But in the text of itself, in the same chapter later on,
throne.
You will find that the same group of the large number, it says they serve him in the temple, the same reference.
Yeah.
So it could go both ways, but I still believe it's based on the text of Revelation 7.
Yeah.
It's telling you of this larger number. Maybe it is is saying in effect, these are like Israel who have overcome. And because they overcame, they were given the white robes, and all of them are before the throne.
Yeah, one thing that we have to remember in chapter 4 and 5, we're in the temple, right? We're in the temple. We see the throne of God, the 24 elders, the 4 living creatures. In verse 9, it's making it perfectly clear that this great multitude is standing before the throne. They're also in the temple, right? This great multitude is in the temple with Jesus, and they're worshiping him. So you're not seeing that distinction there, right? Between the 144,000 and this great group. I'll give you a few different ideas. There's some people that will say that the great multitude and the 144,000 are the same group, except the 144,000 is like the symbolic number given to that group. So it's a way of creating a title for that group. These are the 144,000, which again would be the 12 times 12,000, everyone that's going to be saved. That's one group. Another group says that the 144,000 are separate from the great multitude, but are part of the great multitude. So it's like a group within a group. So there's going to be a great multitude, everyone that's going to be saved. And within that group, there's a special group of 144,000.
Yeah, I think so.
And then there's a third group that says that they're completely separate. There's 144,000 which have a specific job at the end, but in the end of the day, they have to be part of the large group. So I'm not even sure how they explain that. So I would actually say that it falls into those groups. So they're either the same group or it's a group within a group. All right. We're gonna try to find out. Again, that's why we're reading through the Bible. We're gonna come up to the 144,000 again, and we'll see if we can't add extra layers and understanding to who this is. Right now, we're trying to use just what the Bible is teaching us, right? So let's take it step by step and see if we can't grow our understanding. Go ahead, Yvonne.
I was just thinking that if it was different in any way, there would be somewhere in the Bible to explain it, because like when the Bible says to God, a day to
like
us is a year to us is a day to him. And that is mentioned in the Bible. So that's why I was saying if this would be different, he would explain it elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, let's keep reading. Let's keep reading and let's see what comes up. So John has heard about this group, 144,000, and then he sees this great multitude, which is before God and is singing to God, who have white robes and palm branches. All right. Let's keep reading now, because I think there's one more. Let me just double check. Yeah. So this is the last couple of verses of this chapter. All right. Does someone want to read just verses 13 and 14? Just the first 2 verses.
Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, you know. So he said to me, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb.
All right. This verse is very important, all right? A lot of people mix up the verses in this chapter a little bit. And they basically say the 144,000 are those that go through the Great Tribulation. But that's not what this verse is saying, all right? You have to be very careful. It says, in fact, it says, who are these wearing the white robes? Which is a direct connection, not to the 144,000, but to the great multitude. All right. The great multitude is the one that John actually sees wearing white robes. All right. We have no idea what the 144,000 are wearing. It never mentions it. And in fact, he never sees it. So for the elder, for the elder to say, who are they in the white robes? It can only be talking about one group. It can only be talking about the great multitude. So it's the great multitude who goes through the great tribulation, who comes out of the great tribulation, washes their robes, and makes them white with the blood of the Lamb. All right. So don't get confused, because I hear this a lot of times. The 144,000 are a special group that go through the great tribulation. The Bible does not teach that. All right. The Bible never says that the 144,000 are the ones that go through the great tribulation. The great multitude goes through the tribulation. All right. Anything else in terms of just these two verses here before we read the rest? Because verse 15 is actually what Ken mentioned just a little while ago. But any questions in terms of that question and the answer, in terms of those who are wearing the white robes?
I think we really have to nail this 144,000 down.
Oh,
Because
if you can do that, you'll be a superstar, because this has been going on since the days of
another
Ellen
reason
White.
why I'm saying that it could cause a lot of confusion with people. So that's why I'm saying if we can do some kind of research to really and truly see, there's a function for them. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, well, and that's why we're, again, the best research you could do is to go verse by verse, and that's what we're doing. So remember today, because we're going to talk about the 144,000 today. It's going to come up again. We're going to join the two ideas together. So what we learn today and what we learn in the future, we're going to come together again, and we'll kind of layer it together and see if we can get a better understanding.
Right.
At a minimum, we know that this is a group that is sealed at, right before the end, right before the wind.
Yes, right. Because it says, before I seal my servants.
Yeah. We also know that it's at least the tribes seem to be symbolic, right? The fact that we're talking about Israel as that conqueror, the fact that we're talking about the four winds of the earth, so it's more of a global idea and so on. Everyone gets stuck on that number, though, right? Why in the world do we hear that number, 144,000?
Because it's in the Bible. That's why.
Yeah, but that's the whole point, right? If God puts it in the Bible, it's because there's a point to it, right?
There's a point to be made, or to understand.
So here is an interesting thought from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 9, that talks about in those days the sealing. It says, these are these beings, and one had an inkhorn, a righteous inkhorn, and his job was to seal. And let me just read the text. It says, this is Ezekiel chapter 9, and I'm looking at verse 4, and it says, and the Lord said to him, this is the angel with the inkhorn, he said to him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it. So apparently the people sealed are those who are really surprised and who is probably burdened by the wickedness done
Troubled, yeah.
within the so this sealing is not for a special group in this case. It doesn't mark out some special group to be sealed, but everybody who has concerns over the wickedness and are burdened by this. And so on, those are the ones who are sealed.
Yeah.
I don't know if they may have some reference, because it's very similar to the sealing.
And it's like you said, Ken, we know
But
Ezekiel and
these
Revelation go
can,
together, right?
what I'm
Go ahead, Ivan. Go ahead.
what I was thinking is that before the strife starts, they have a special purpose, and they had to have been sealed before the winds were loosed. That's what I'm getting from this verse. See, I don't know if anybody else sees that, but that's what I'm looking.
I think with that thought, Yvonne, what comes to my mind is that in the very last days, when all of these seals and these tragedies are taking place, I guess there'll be a lot of anxiety for God's people who are in the midst of all this tribulation and going through difficulties. And God is going to decide to make a difference in bringing some kind of solace and comfort to them by sealing them. So they wouldn't be turned away or turned out. They're comforted in knowing that they're settling into truth.
Yeah.
I can give you one explanation as to why that number and so on. One of the reasons, or one of the rules, I guess, of prophecy is once you get a chapter and you realize, okay, this is symbolic, right? If part of it is symbolic, then usually the whole thing has to be symbolic, right? Otherwise, you're just picking and choosing what fits your ideas, right? So if you see something that's, this is symbolic, then the rest of it should also be symbolic. Otherwise, it gets really confusing, right? How do you ever know if something is symbolic or not, right? So usually you follow that line. If it starts symbolic, then it'll continue symbolic. If it is symbolic,
so are you saying that the great number? Are you saying that the great multitude that was seen, are they symbolic as well? Is that what I'm hearing?
The great number.
That John saw, the multitude, the great multitude that John saw. Is that symbolic as well?
That's literal.
That seems to be literal, right? As far as we can tell, because he's seeing it now, right? He's actually seeing this image, while in the other one he's hearing this message. But it's a good point. Let me just show. I'll give you one example though of what it can possibly mean. Why is it 12,000 from each tribe? Remember that what we're seeing here is the final number of people that are going to be saved before God comes back, right? Because again, if the sealing has been happening since the days of Ezekiel, then odds are the sealing of God has actually taken place throughout history, right? When you accept Christ, when you become a child of Christ, you receive the seal of God, right? You are now sealed. You are now a child of God. This last group is basically saying, listen, I'm not done my work. I need to finish, I have to seal the last of my people. And the reason why it ends up being 144,000 is because it's, again, 12,000 of each of the 12 tribes. The 12 tribes represent the 12 types of people, personalities or characteristics, whatever word you want to use. And the fact that it's 12,000 is basically God saying, I'm going to get every single last one of them. I'm not going to get only 11. I'm going to get the full 12. So it's God's way of saying everyone that can be saved will be saved. I'm not gonna let one fall or let the time run out before he has a chance to be sealed. everyone has the opportunity, and everyone that can be saved will be saved. Everyone will be part of that group, which is why it's a full 12 times 12. But again, that's just an idea. It's Yvonne, at the end of the day, you're reading the Bible, and you're going to get what you believe, and that's perfectly fine, right? As long as
Yeah.
you're using the Bible to explain it. This is something that, I mean, even Ellen White herself says, listen, it's great to discuss it. It's great to have these things. What's important is to remember that this isn't a salvation issue, right? So don't put aside
Right.
salvation issues and focus completely on who the 144,000 are.
No,
Unfortunately,
no.
that happens though.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you get people that
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
like puzzles that get stuck on this 144,000, and they leave everything else behind. They're not nice people. They're not giving. They're not evangelizing. They're not whatever. They focus so much on this one little thing that they lose their salvation because of it, right?
Right.
And so that's
It's
one
just
thing I don't
nice
want
to really know. It's
Yeah,
right nice
yeah,
to know.
absolutely.
But no, my focus is my getting there.
All right, so Richard is asking if you believe COVID, would you consider an event like COVID as the beginning of the Great Tribulation, or is it specifically during the time of the plagues, so the 7 last plagues, or after the plagues? Any thoughts? Any thoughts?
I think it's a beginning. I think it's a beginning.
If you read, again, going back to Ellen White, if you read her book End Time Events, she talks about, there's the 7 last plagues, which we haven't gotten to yet, but it's further down in Revelation. But before the 7 last plagues, there's kind of, she calls it the little time of trouble, right?
Right.
Which is like a little mini events, which
Yeah,
its
preparing
purpose,
us.
yeah, the purpose of that event is basically the shaking, right? It's to weed out those that really aren't part of God and to bring in those that aren't part of God's family yet. All right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
believe that something like COVID could be part of that little time of trouble, right? Because
Yeah.
what we're seeing in the world is this, people are making choices. They're either drifting away from church or they're very much grabbing on stronger, right? Judy, go ahead.
Yeah.
Right now we are having, I wouldn't call it little trouble, with persecution of Asians as well as Blacks and Jews, and it's increasing daily.
Yeah.
There was a big discussion on the radio today about this. So yes, I think we are really at the beginning of our tribulations.
Well, one thing that I would say to that, Judy, is I don't think it's starting now. I think it's being discussed now. Because if you look at, racial inequality of blacks and that goes back centuries, right?
Yeah, but right now it goes back centuries, but right now it is really increasing so much.
Yeah. I think it's flaring up, and it's in the news now, right? If this was, 100 years ago, it wouldn't even make it to the news, kind of a thing. But because it is in the news, it's creating that response and that pushback. Again, when you read someone like Paul, when Paul is talking to Timothy, he makes it very clear, as we get closer to the time of the end, people's hearts will grow cold. They won't have love one for another. People will be more violent, more greedy, everything that we're seeing, right?
And we're seeing that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they've actually done studies with this, by the way. They did studies on empathy, so how much we empathize with others, and they say every generation it decreases. Every generation, people are just colder and colder, and so yeah, I mean, I definitely think we're at the beginning of something. I would suggest that it's probably that little time that comes before the 7 last plagues. The 7 last plagues, when we get to them, are very precise. You're not gonna You're not going to get them confused. These are world scale events that are very specific, and so you're not going to confuse them with just things that happen around. So I would definitely put this more as a precursor. Yeah, Ivan.
Another thing I was just came to my mind was, I don't know if anybody else has heard it, but that they're wanting to inject kids from 3 to stop the hormone growth. And when they're 12, they can decide what sex they want to be. So if this is what is starting to happen or suggesting, wasn't this something before the flood? They're playing with God's creation?
I actually haven't heard of that, but that's
No, I haven't
scary
heard of
if it's
that
true.
either.
If it's true, that's scary. Um, we're living in some crazy times. We
It
know
was
that.
suggested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know. I mean, we're living in a society now where when a baby is born, you ask what gender it is, they won't tell you. They're like, well, it hasn't chosen yet, right? So that's happening. That's definitely a new mentality in the world, right? Um, but
Louise is saying it's true there.
is it true? All right, so there you go. It's possible. Uh, we're getting pretty good with genetics. That's a scary thing, right? Unfortunately, every
Yeah.
good thing that we do also causes about 10 bad things. So it can only go downhill. One other thing that I know is true. I heard this just last week sometime. It was a report that the fertility rates are decreasing very quickly, especially like in first world countries, so like Canada, the States, Europe, and things like that. Men are becoming infertile. Like it's decreased. I think it was as much as 15% already. So that basically,
Wow.
literally, the sperm can't get to the egg. Like
Produce.
they're so screwed up that they can't get there. So the way things are going, um, once there's infertility, the world ends, right? So God has to come before that.
Oh,
We
yeah.
know that there's like a time limit basically. There's a time limit in terms of infertility. There's a time limit in terms of pollution and things like that before this world becomes unlivable. So we know God isn't far off, because we know God is going to come to a world that still has people in it, right? So
Yeah.
it definitely tells us that it's not that far off. No gender clothing for children. Yeah, that's a big thing I know in Europe as well. Even the gender neutral bathrooms, right? There's no boys and women, boys or girls bathrooms anymore. Now it's just bathrooms. So yeah, we're definitely moving in that direction. Um,
Excuse me a sec.
no problem. Let's go back into Revelation 7 here. Let's read the last 3 verses, so 15 to 17. Can someone read that?
Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. They shall neither hunger any more nor thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of waters. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes.
All right. So again, let's make sure that we know what group we're talking about here. This is the great multitude, right? That we're
Right.
talking about here. So it's the great multitude who wears the white robes, who goes through the great tribulation, who follows, where does it say? They are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. So it's the great multitude that's in the temple, not the
Yeah.
144,000, right?
Right.
And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them, and they shall follow the Lamb, right? Let me see here. For the Lamb who sits on the throne will shepherd them and lead them to the living water. So they follow Jesus around. So again, every time that we talk about the 144,000, we usually apply these things to them. And in fact, Ellen White does, right? I think, Richard, you mentioned that, right? That it's the 144,000 that serve God day and night in the temple, that follow Jesus around. But the Bible is making it very, very clear that it's the great multitude. So if Ellen White is right, that means that the 144,000 have to be the same group.
Well, can I ask a question here?
Yes.
What about this thing where we will plant and reap? If we're in a temple 24 hours a day, so that's what I'm thinking is symbolic, because otherwise there'll be nothing going on but just worshiping God.
Mm-hmm. I think it's symbolic in this sense. When we read this, we're thinking about like this physical building, right? But remember, you have to put every single person that's going to be saved, this great multitude, has to fit within this building then, right? It's got to be this massive building. If you take the temple of God as symbolic, right? The Bible makes it very clear that the universe is the temple of God, right? The earth is just his footstool, right?
Yeah, right.
So if the temple of God is simply God's reign, right? This is what God rules, then you could be on the other side of the universe. You're still in God's temple, right? You're still in the presence of God. So even when you're planting and reaping and building your house or doing anything else, you're in the presence of God, right? You're there. So I think that this can be somewhat symbolic in the sense of um, we're never going to leave God, right? You have to think of this as a Jew, right? So a Jew that lives in Galilee, he would have to make a trip to the temple, visit the Lord there, do his sacrifice, and then he would leave the presence of God and go home. What this is saying is you'll never leave the presence of
You'll
God.
always be in God's
You'll
presence.
always be there with him, whether you're there physically before the throne or whether just the fact that you're in his heaven, right, in his universe.
Right. Right.
So I
Makes
think
sense.
it's symbolic in that sense. Ken, you got
Let,
something?
let me read a text that will clarify this for Judy.
Yeah.
And this is Revelation 21, and I'm reading verses 22 and 23. And it says, "But I saw no temple in it." This is the recreated world. "I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple.
Yeah.
The city had no need of the sun or the moon and so on and so forth." So there's no temple as we would know it today, but the presence of God and the Lamb is the temple.
Exactly. So as long as you're bathing in that light, you're in his temple. Now the thing is his light reaches the ends of the universes, right? He's everywhere. He's, therefore, yeah, you could be on a whole other planet. You're still in his temple. You're still in his presence, worshiping God and so on. But yeah, so verses 15 to 17 make it very clear that it's the great multitude that worships God in his temple, that follows Jesus around day and night, right? So again, it really seems to join those two groups together, because everything that you think you know about the 144,000, the Bible is telling you that it's the great multitude that does this thing. They're the ones that go through the great tribulation. They're the ones that worship in the temple with God. They're the ones that follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Everything that makes the 144,000 special, the great multitude also does. So it's, again, you have to read it and then make up your mind, right? What do you think it means? Lynette, you're on mute. We can't hear you. There you
I
go.
have a question. It says, "And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." That means what, they'll be living forever, or they would not go through like heat and hunger and these things any longer?
Yeah, what it basically means is all the consequences of sin no longer exist, right? There is no more pain. There is no more death. There is no more sorrow. There's no more need for crying and so on, right? That's really what this is saying. It's going to repeat itself when we get to the end of Revelation, and it kind of gives us that wrap up. And it says, the New Jerusalem isn't a place. It's not like Toronto or any other city on this world. where there's still sin, right? That new city, that new world that God is creating doesn't have sin anymore, which means it doesn't have any of the consequences of sin anymore. So I would say that that's really what that's saying there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other ideas, thoughts, final comments? What time are we at? 8:12.
And it would probably be like going back to the Garden of Eden again.
Yeah, it's kind of like a full circle. It very much is written specifically to be like that, which is why the tree appears again, right? And there's a lot of imagery from Eden that reappears in the New Jerusalem, except the New Jerusalem, the end of Revelation, is actually better than Eden, right? Because when you read Eden, God would only visit, right? God would visit in the evening and speak with them and so on. In Revelation, God lives there, right? God is actually, your neighbor in heaven. So you never leave the presence of God, right? So it's like a super Eden in that respect, which is something to look forward to for sure.
Yeah.
Better than the neighbors I have right now, which smoke marijuana like day and night, and all,
Mhm.
all I smell is marijuana. In heaven, it'll be a better neighbor, better neighbor.
Oh
Better
dear.
atmosphere.
Yeah,
So looking at this particular, these verses, and it tells me that even though we may slow down global warming, the final effect will still be there, because here are people who the Lord is saying to them, the sun will not strike you anymore, nor the heat.
Yeah.
And so shortage of water, food, and the heat, or global warming, the effect of global warming may be slowing down, but we wouldn't be able to stop it.
yeah, yeah. Well, and to be honest, a lot of scientists have kind of hinted at the fact that we're beyond, the consequences are going to happen. The idea now is just to minimize the effects of global warming, right? They don't like to say that much because a lot of people, they're kind of 0 or 100, black or white. So they either for it, if they think that it's already done, oh, then I'm not even going to try. I might as well go back to the way I was and just burn gasoline and everything else. But most scientists would actually say that we've kind of already passed that point of no return. We are going to feel the effects of climate change and like the sun overheating, and I think we've seen some of that, right? Like
Yes, yes.
the weather patterns are just crazy.
Mhm, mhm.
The idea of, summer is when it's hot, spring is when it rains, and the seasons don't make sense anymore. Even like the animals seem to get confused sometimes, right? They come back and then it snows again. Trees bud and then everything freezes, and so everything is kind of out of place. It's all in the Bible, right? These nature events warning us of what's coming.
So the sealing of itself, sealing of the saints, or those who worship God, reminds me that in spite of all the tragedy that we've passed by, the sixth seal, God steps in, and he, before the last one is done, where there's silence in heaven, as it says, and God makes sure that his servants are sealed. They, as Ellen White says, they're settled into the truth so strongly that it can't be moved. And this is where it's important for us to remember that we need to continue to study God's word, that we may settle into that truth so that nothing will move us.
Yeah, I would say, just adding on to that, one good way of kind of visualizing the sealing is to go back to Egypt, right? When Israel was there in Egypt, and God says, put the blood of the lamb on the doorposts so that you're sealed, right? You have the seal on the door, and the angel of God will just pass by. Because this sealing here, this final sealing, is very much kind of before the winds come in, right? Before the plagues come in. And so it's God's way of saying, listen, if you don't want to suffer through the plagues. If you want my protection, then you have to put that blood, on the doorpost. You have to put the seal around you. And again, what does that blood represent? It represents the blood of Jesus. So the sealing is, accepting Jesus Christ and the gospel and the good news. And, we'll get more into what the sealing is. We're going to get into three angels' message and all of those things. But the Bible, Revelation will make it very clear what the seal of God is, and why it's important for us to make sure we have that seal, right? But just a way to visualize it, just think about the doorposts. It's what saved Israel, right? It's what saved them from, losing the firstborn son and so on. So it's definitely important. All right, I'm gonna end it here just because of time, and I want to make sure we have some time for prayer. Let me just stop recording here.